Kia ora friends, welcome back to my studio. I'm Gina, and in today's video we're going to be tackling this room in the Addams family. This room sits above the dining room, and then we've got the slide room here. So if you haven't checked out either one of those videos, I'll pop a link in the description below. So this room up here is going to be the electric chair room, or the sort of playroom for Wednesday and Pugsley. So I have created already the electric chair, and I did create this before I started the channel, so I don't actually have a video of it. However, I did follow Ara from Bentley House Minis, her tutorial, so I'll put a link to that video in the description below as well. So that's going to sit in the middle here. And I do want to put in a little bit of a brick wall as well as some wood paneling, which is going to be very similar to what we've done for the actual slide room. So I'm just going to quickly go through that with the magic of editing, and we're going to do the floor the same as the rest of the project, and we're going to do some wood paneling. So let's get that done. So this room is specifically going to be dedicated to Wednesday and Pugsley, because both of them, or especially Wednesday, likes to find different ways to torture her brother. So one of them obviously is the electric chair, so I can just pop that back in there now, and we just move that back around. So there we go, that's what it looks like now. I've also got a little control panel that I've also done that'll be stuck to the brick wall. So now let's get into the details, which is going to be the fun bit. So let's get started on those. So to begin with the electrical panel, all I'm going to do is start with the dials, and I'm using these jump rings and a bit of UV resin to create the glass look over the top of the dials. So I've just printed off some pictures of some antique dials, and then I'm just going to put a bit of Mod Podge over them and then glue the jump rings and UV resin on top of those, and then I'm just going to cut those out. So in order for them to sit onto something, I'm just using some leftover pieces from the walls and just going to add those on as if one of the kids had actually created or built this themselves just out of what they had lying around. And that's the little electrical panel there that I've created when I created the electric chair. Now I'm just using a hair tie to create the wire in between. The reason why I'm using a hair tie is that it's flexible and it's really easy to work with. So just a little bit of super glue on one end, and then I can attach it underneath each one of those dials and then attach it to the panel. So to create the cables that feed through to the actual chair, I've just used a bit of telephone cable that came in a modem, I think it was, and so it's actually quite heavy, and I really wanted it to be quite substantial. So putting this into place, they've got a natural kink into the wire, which I'm going to utilize to my advantage. So I'm just going to put the electric chair into the room, and you just mark the back of the electric chair with a bit of blue tape, and then that gives me a guide of where I can glue the cables to the floor. And I'm just using a little bit of super glue to do that, and I just want them to come to the back of the chair, and then once the chair sits in front of it, it'll look like it's all connected even though it's not. So one thing I wanted to do was create an apple with an arrow through the middle of it, as if Wednesday has had it on Pugsley's head and fired from her crossbow into the middle of the apple. So I'm just using a bit of Polymer Clay. I've just sort of mixed a bit of bright yellow with a bit of white, and I'm going to create 2 apples. And I'm just going to use a little soft silicone shaper in order to shape the apple. So apples are just generally a little bit narrower on the bottom end and a little bit wider at the top. So I'm just going to poke the little silicone shaper into the bottom and then just add a little bit of detail, and then I'm just going to do exactly the same for the top. So just to colour them up before they put them into bake, I'm just going to use some pigment powders, and I'm going to use a little bit of the green on the bottom and then varying shades of sort of orange and red over the side of the apple, and I'm going to leave the top of it yellow. That's the reason why I've gone with the yellow to begin with. And this gives it sort of a bit more of a real look, so as if it's been naturally ripened in the sun. For the stalk of the apple, I'm just using the very tip of a toothpick and just pressing that in. I'm happy for it to be left reasonably long at this stage. I will cut it down before I paint it. And to fit the arrow in, I'm just using this needle point pokey tool thing, just to poke through the actual polymer clay, because I didn't want to bend it too much out of shape, so I just wanted to give it somewhere for the arrow to go. And for the arrow itself, I've just used a toothpick and just shaved it down much more narrower, and then put a little point on the end of it as well. Moving on to the crossbow, I am wanted to create a bit more of a vintage looking crossbow rather than anything too modern. One thing with the Addams family, a lot of their weapons, especially in Gomez's office, is there's a lot of vintage type of weapons, very old school sort of collector. And so I wanted the crossbow to give that same sort of look. So I'm just using a bit of balsa wood and just drawing out the shape, and then just using my craft knife and sandpaper in order to shape it. Along with the help of our supervisor. And God, he loves getting really close, doesn't he? So yeah, I'm just using my craft knife very, very carefully, because balsa is very soft, so it's very easy to cut too much away. So just using my craft knife just to cut a little slit out of the very top of the main part of the bow. And then I've got some stuff that you get from like a roasting pan. So it's a bit thicker than normal aluminium foil or aluminum foil. So it just gives me the ability to shape it a little bit easier. So that's going to give me the arch of the bow, and what I'm going to do is actually cut it in half, because I want it to come out to each of the sides of the bow rather than just sitting across the top. And then I've just added in a couple of layers of cardstock in different shapes, as if that's the support for the actual bow itself. And then just that's the little trigger, just with a little bit of wire. I'm just using a bit of watered down brown paint to use it as a stain across the bow. And for the little pieces on the side, I really want them to look a little bit more metal, so I'm just using a little bit of silver paint to paint those. And so now I can attach the metal pieces to each side of the bow, so that'll give me a little bit more detail, a little bit more definition. I'm just using a little bit of super glue, and I just bent over the very end of it just to give it a little bit more surface area in order for the glue to grab. I had a bit of embroidery thread that I just separated out all the threads, and just using one of the threads as the string to the bow and very carefully tying that into place, because the actual metal is really quite soft, so it bends easily. What I want to do is actually create another arrow. So this is what the process that I did for the one for the apple, just shaving it off very carefully and then using the sandpaper just to kind of narrow down the toothpick a little bit more, and that allows me to be able to carve out the very tip of it to give it a little bit more of a point on the arrow as well. And then once that's all painted up, it really does start to look like a miniature arrow. And then also I wanted to do was add in a ball and chain, and in order to do that I wanted to create a shackle for the end of the ball, and I'm just using that same aluminum, wherever you come from, in order to shape that. And what I'm doing here is just creating a hinge for the back of the shackle. And then just using a paintbrush to bend the aluminum round, and then just cutting that down to shape, and that gives me the shape that I'm looking for. And then all I'm going to do is just cut down those long tails, and then just using a little drill to drill through as if there was a padlock or something that would go through there in order to secure it in place. And then I just use a little jewellery finding in order to attach the chain to the shackle. So for the ball at the end, I had a bead that was pretty much the perfect size, and again I just used a jewellery finding and just glued that through the hole in the bead. And that's all we have time for today. So if you've liked this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't done so already. I'm going to create another video next week which will have a little bit more details. I'm looking to create Uncle Knick-Knack, so stick around and tune in for that one. And until next week, I'll see you then. Bye for now.